Welcome to the Mother Town Podcast, a production of the Thayer Memorial Library and Sterling-Lancaster Community TV. I'm your host, Joe Mulé. It's my hope that the Mother Town Podcast will accomplish two things. For listeners to know town officials who live in Lancaster and the staff who come to work every day ready to serve residents. The other part is to understand how my guests meet the challenges of the day every day. In this inaugural edition, I'm pleased to have with me today Kate Hodges, who is the Town of Lancaster's Town Administrator. Kate, welcome to the Mother Town.
Thank you for having me.
Kate, this is your second spring working in Lancaster, right? And probably your first annual town meeting. Do I have that right?
Yeah, today is actually my 1 year anniversary.
1 year.
1 year.
So that's two springs, right? You started on the spring and it's now spring again.
That's correct.
And is it your first ATM?
The last ATM that I was at, I was a casual observer.
That's right.
The interim town administrator was still running the show. I think it might have been my third or fourth day.
Yeah. How did that feel?
It was good. It was interesting. I really enjoyed who I now know to be Roy Resnick standing up and offering $1 for
right.
a more robust budget.
That was a historic town meeting for all of us.
Yep.
And a nice introduction into what you were about to deal with coming here to Lancaster and the interesting people that are involved in the governance of the community.
Mm-hmm. I sent him his $1 back.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the first iteration of the budget
Is that the
book.
first in town history's underwrite? What would you call it that? Or
I did tell him if things go well this season, maybe he can give us the $1 and we can mount it.
Representation right there in Prescott. This
Correct.
is the $1 that started it all?
This is the $1 heard around the world.
So I guess, every job, especially one that has so much responsibilities, you got a honeymoon period, right? You have so much to learn. I mean, when I started here as the library director, it took me a couple of years to get my feet together, right? I came from another state, and I had to learn so much about how things worked in Massachusetts. So I had a generous amount of time to get things together. Do you have any time left on your honeymoon?
I guess my interpretation of a honeymoon is a little different than yours, because on mine I sat around and did nothing, and it was lovely.
Where'd you go?
We went to Florida. My husband was in police academy, and so he only came home for the weekend, and we got married, and then he left for an additional 4.5 months. So ours was a delayed honeymoon, but it was an interesting first year because mostly I took a pottery class.
Well, it sounds like an exciting first year if your husband is...
Yeah, we were young. I was only 21. So I would say for the most part, the first 6 months in particular were, kind of spent just seeing how everything goes. There's a lot of opportunity, as there is in most communities. And, it seemed like my style was different than that of my predecessors. And some of that was introduced slowly, and in other instances, it couldn't be introduced slowly because there were things that we needed to do. I would say that I began on the 25th of April, and in approximately 3 weeks, the first email that I had to send to all of the staff was a budget freeze, which is just not something that I had anticipated doing.
I'm your new town administrator, and you can't buy any more books at the library.
And you can't do anything.
Yeah.
So, I can say that unequivocally, I've worked for 2 different communities in Massachusetts and 1 in Connecticut, and it was the warmest welcome I had received from the staff. As a matter of fact, in talking to people from the community that I used to work with, they asked me, how is it going? And I said, there doesn't seem to be any infighting here, which isn't to say that, I'm so naive to think that there isn't. But for the most part, we sit in a room. I mean, you're part of that, Joe, and we, bounce ideas off of one another. We have a couple of chuckles, and we come away with a shared purpose, and that was refreshing. And so that's kept anything that happens that was less than refreshing sort of in the back of my mind.
As a human matter, I have to believe starting a new job like this, was this your first town administrator job?
Yes.
It's a big job, big leap from what you were doing in Concord. And you had a lot of enthusiasm, I'm sure, and we're ready to get in your hands dirty. Would you say that those first couple of months, 6 months, you weren't daunted at all? A little, my goodness, I have to reevaluate my expectations of what I can do and when I can do it.
Yeah, I'm still daunted today, even probably more so, because it's more of an informed idea of what's on the horizon. And I mean, let's face it, the elephant in the room today is, are we going to have the means and the capital to do what I know needs to be done? I don't know how to accomplish it without that. And that is that's a difficult thing to get people to understand and appreciate in the first year in office for anybody, because what kind of credibility do I have? And it isn't for lack of trust or people not wanting to trust me. It's that I haven't been here long enough. So I think it's a huge leap of faith.
And many people weren't part of the interviewing process.
Correct.
The people who hired you might have been wowed. Wow, let's get her going. This is the one. But all of us are looking at, here comes change again. Mm-hmm. And that's the next question I wonder about. When new leadership comes into an organization, novel ways of doing things are presented to staff because people skin cats in different ways. Thank goodness. What was your impression of department heads then when you were trying to roll out your vision of how you wanted your management team to work? How were your department heads? Were they pleased by it? Was there trepidation, or did you win people over pretty quickly?
Well, I guess I should ask you that. But I would say nobody seemed to be outwardly upset. I think coming off of what was COVID and then an interim, and that's no knock on the interim, but that position is to keep the trains on the tracks and running. It's not to add new stops or add new trains. There was sort of this desire, I think, for a camaraderie that had been missing. And I was very quick to say that I wasn't necessarily interested in exploring why that didn't exist before, why it existed and went away. It was just to move forward. And that seemed to be received well by the majority of folks. The idea of having one-on-one meetings with the department heads, most once a week, others twice a week, depending on the size of the operation, seemed to be a new concept to a lot of folks who had said that they had worked here for many years and haven't had that. And I think as much as it also is about the operation of the day, of course, there's long-term planning that comes from those organic conversations like we're having here. And so there's also relationship building. I don't want people to work for me. I want them to work with me. That's what I'm hoping the select board sees in me, that while I work for them, I'm working with them on a common set of goals and objectives. So I would say that the staff was more than welcoming. There's been plenty of bumps in the road, and I have found just a lot of positivity and a lot of appreciation for us all trying to row in the same direction.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I think I may have shared with you once, you started a budget cycle much sooner than I could ever remember encountering. And you brought in a certain degree of, what's the word I want to use? You wanted a lot from us. You wanted a lot. And there was a lot of documents you wanted from us. And there were a lot of different ways you wanted us to present you information, right? Without actually us knowing a lot about what the end product was. Mm-hmm. Now today we see what that end product is. Mm-hmm. And anybody who reads that document can't say there weren't many hours that went into producing it from many people mm-hmm. who added to it. But what I remember is looking at the faces the day you presented that, and the faces were saying, I can't wait to get to work. Mm-hmm. I can't wait to put my budget out there and talk about my department and, why we ask for what we ask for, to do what we're charged to do, mm-hmm. and to make a connection between what people are doing and how people are funded is the connection that is most important for your taxpayers to know.
Yeah.
And so I think the department heads recognize that. Finally, people are going to understand, right, how this works. And it's just not, here's the number, vote on it. It's here's the number, read up about it. And I saw that from the very beginning, not knowing it. And many of us didn't know that this is going to be good. So,
And I remember actually saying after that staff meeting, I had a select board meeting the following week. And so I showed the select board the blank sheets and just said, how's the staff receiving this, given that it seems like it's more work than it has been in the past, and they already have jobs and things on their plate. And I was just really excited that everybody seemed to be very happy with doing it. It's rare that people are happy to have more things that they have to do.
It was to me like a preview to an upcoming movie everybody was going to be excited about, because, as you mentioned in that first town meeting, there was a real hunger for more information. People will use the word transparency, but this isn't that. This is information that people can sit with and try to understand, ask questions based on it, and then make the decisions for them that make the most sense. Yeah, I would go to people during that time who would say things like this about the town meeting, this is the way it was in the past, and I don't have any faith that I'm going to know more about it. And I would say to them, just wait. That $1, you're going to get exactly what you want. And what you hear now from people is it's so much that they don't have enough time to read it. And I've had conversations with people that go something like, but you still have to read it. This is a time, if you've never read up on what your government's doing, this is the time to start reading.
Absolutely.
So some of our listeners who might not know a lot about town government, not exactly reading Board of Selectmen meetings minutes in the bathroom on their free time while they're watching their kids play softball, they don't know a lot about how things work in this town. And I read your manual, and one of the things I was really happy to see in it was that you were describing and talking about the style of government in Lancaster. What is the style of government in Lancaster?
Yeah, so we have an open town meeting, select board, town administrator form of government. So what that means is the legislative body meets at least once a year at an annual town meeting, and there the legislative body, which is the citizens, make decisions on the rules and regulations that not only govern Lancaster for that year, but for many years moving forward, with certain acts, resolve, zoning amendments, etc. The select board is an elected 3-member board, and they oversee the town administrator, and they have the option, which is often called sometimes a strong town administrator versus a weak town administrator. They have the option to delegate the responsibility of overseeing staff or anything relative to staff hiring, development, discipline, etc., and union negotiations to the town administrator. That has been a mixed bag in Lancaster. Some years and some boards haven't delegated that. I was fortunate enough that the select board did delegate that responsibility to me in the summer, last summer. And so they oversee me as a staff member and certainly are part of all of the processes, but the day-to-day go through this office. And so that's sort of our form as it is right now.
So government is on a year, right? It's on a fiscal year. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
A fiscal year. And how's that different than the calendar year we work on? Why is there a fiscal year?
So the fiscal year is July 1st to June 30th. And generally speaking, it goes with the way that the state and federal governments have set up their operations. It's been that way for a very, very long time. There's very few communities that operate on an annual. And part of it is because the state aid and the Chapter 70 funds, which are for education, Chapter 90 funds, which are for road improvements, all operate on fiscal. So if we were to do a calendar, we would only be operating with 6 months worth of data.
So I think some folks might say, well, there's this big event and it's called town meeting and it's an annual thing. And there's these other town meetings and somehow they're called special, but they're in a calendar that people can predict. And the end of a fiscal year in May is sort of the culmination, and you can correct me, of all the work that was done over the last year and maybe some unsettled matters that are legacy. Is that fair to say? Would you change that at all?
No, I think it's basically a culmination of approximately 10 months worth of work and then some.
So if the annual town meeting is the culmination of a year's worth of work, then what's the Board of Selectmen doing most of the time? I mean, they're starting a new calendar year. How do we put together a town meeting? Like, when does that start? Are we talking about the town meeting in April and putting together information, or how does that process start?
So I think it varies for every board. So I can only talk of my experience. But this town meeting that's coming up next week, we've been talking about since the day that last town meeting concluded. And that's because there are things that are not fully baked yet that you need to see through both the public hearing process, the public vetting process, the process that goes through legal counsel, et cetera, to get it, whatever it is, to get the idea or the amendment or the policy to a certain place where then it can be voted on by the people. So let's take the budget, for example. We're asking people to vote on a budget that admittedly is contingent on a Prop 2.5 override passing at the annual election. But the budget process can't just be started in April because there's a long process that goes through that. And for this year, it was even longer because we were introducing a new way of doing it. But we also had a lot of sessions that were available and open to the public, including select board and finance committee joint meetings, several different budget forums that were open to the public, the warrant forum that happened last week. And so all of those inform and create the final document, which is then voted upon. Same thing is true for senior means tax exemption program that you'll be seeing in this year's annual town meeting. That was started right around the time that we started talking about the budget. And the impetus behind that was we knew that we were going to need an override, but we also knew that at some point that was going to be a real burden on people with fixed incomes. And most of those persons with fixed incomes are seniors.
So, Kate, let's get down to some particulars. I want to kind of go down to basics because I'll tell you, when I came here from New Jersey, a suburb of New York, and I started working in Lancaster, I remember thinking to myself, what the heck are these people doing? It was entirely foreign to me how government worked in a municipality like Lancaster, but it seemed there were a lot of different ways communities were running their government. I think you said before that Board of Selectmen can have a strong town administrator, but some towns I hear town administrator, they're the town manager. Is that true? Are town managers different? Do they have more authority, less authority?
The statute for town administrators and town managers is different. I would say, having worked in both, the ideas are similar, which is that it's a person who is employed by the community to centralize all of the functions of the government, to supervise the staff and the departments, and to organize the thoughts and ideas and proposals from boards and committees, which are made up of citizens, into formats that are generally accepted both in principle and by matter of law.
So in February, you sit down with a pencil in your hand and you write at the top of the paper, warrant, and you start filling in everything you want the town to vote on and how much the budget's going to be. You get to determine all of that because you're the town administrator and you have all this authority and power. If someone doesn't like those warrants, they're going to come after you because you put it that way there. And is that true?
No. So the warrant is the select board's warrant. So what will happen is that all of the boards and committees who have ideas, proposals, or amendments to current existing proposals have a vetting process, and they bring forward whatever their final product is or next to final product, and they give it to the select board to deliberate upon. Now, there's town departments that go through me to do that, and then I bring that to the select board. And so we have a series of meetings, usually twice a month, where we talk about the things that are coming up, and if the ideas or the amendments have gone through all of the processes and they're ready to be voted upon by the people, then the select board will instruct me to put it on the warrant. And that's what I do. There are warrant articles that always need to be voted on every year, classification and compensation plans for town staff, a budget, obviously, that I put together with the finance director and the finance committee. So some of it is just the operational business needs, and other are incentives or amendments that are made by the community. And then, of course, we have citizens petitions, which are not committee driven, but citizen driven. And people come forward as a citizen of the town of Lancaster. They have an idea for a program, or they have a desire for an amendment to some existing program, and they receive signatures to initiate that, and it gets placed on the warrant. And then the citizen gets up in front of his or her peers, and they describe the change that they want, and they ask his or her peers to vote on it. And that has nothing to do with this office. That's 100% citizen driven. And that's the beauty and the uniqueness of Open Town Meeting, which is very, very specific to all of New England, but mostly the only open town meetings that exist still are in the Commonwealth.
I find myself telling certain people of a certain persuasion about how the difference between running a business and how running government is. And I understand there's a source of frustration if you live in the business world that things happen too slow in government. There are too many hands in the pot to help make decisions. There's deliberation, oversight. Why don't we just make a decision and be done with it? What do you say to people who think that way or may have those experiences?
I use my McDonald's example. So I'm the owner of McDonald's, and I own a McDonald's franchise down the road, and my hamburger is $1.19, and somebody comes in off of the side of the road and says, I want your hamburger to be 50 cents. And everybody who agrees with me that the hamburger should be 50 cents, raise your hand. And everybody in the restaurant, or the majority, raise their hand. And then I'm obligated to lower my burger price by 50%. What happens in a couple of months when I can't meet my financial obligations? I have to close my McDonald's and lay people off. So the idea behind that is that there's government in place to ensure that what is being talked about and what's being voted upon is a process that's sustainable and equitable. If you don't like paying $1 plus for a burger, maybe there's a different restaurant or a different program for you, but this is what this costs in order to be able to have a burger from this restaurant.
Is it fair to say with every town meeting, going back to town meetings 100 years ago, that there's going to be an article on that town meeting that people are going to be passionate about? Some people are going to be animated on the floor and want to talk about it, whether it's chickens, the Neshoba Board of Health. Is there always something that's going to come down at a town meeting that it's not going to be boring? We're going to be getting ourselves in a lather over something?
Yeah, I mean, if we're doing our job correctly, at the risk of sounding like a nerd, every article is exciting. I was joking with one of the select board members, Jason Allison, that he says, "Oh, you're really excited about this town meeting." And I said, "Town meeting to the administrators and managers of the world is our Super Bowl." And it was funny, but it's true, because it is truly the democratic process at work, and you watch it unfold in front of your eyes. And there is no other place in the United States or even the world that you can see that happen. And that's pretty cool, even if the vote doesn't go the way that you want it to.
I like that analogy, because I guess what I'm driving at is, if it's the Patriots playing the Chiefs, everybody wants to go to see that Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. If it's the Browns and the Lions, maybe not so many people are interested in it. So I guess what I'm trying to ask about that Super Bowl is, are there some times where the teams playing make more people want to come out and be part of a discussion that's very important to them? Absolutely.
But if you're a true football fan, you just want to be in the stadium.
That's true. And nerds like you and I thrive on that. And some of our citizens do too, year after year. Many citizens, we know each other by name because we look forward to them being at town meeting. So last year, was there any big item on the warrant that people were really interested in and talking a lot about?
So the subject of a couple of special town meetings this year were zoning related for potential development in North Lancaster. And I think certainly the meeting in January of this year, which was the final special meeting of this year, leading up to this annual town meeting, had a record attendance. And clearly people were passionate on both sides. So that was really great to see the amount of people who care enough to, give up time on a Saturday, come out, cast their vote, debate the matter in a forum in front of their neighbors and friends, and then leave and still be part of the community.
I have to say that was probably a moment in our history as a town that I'm most proud of, is that so many people came out. Mm-hmm. We have never seen anything like that. It was a point of pride to know that I worked in a town where people were coming out for something that was really important to them and willing to put it out there.
Yep.
And persuade others to feel the way that they feel about something, because that's what politics is. Let me give you a case and persuade you it's the right one, but you might have to disagree, and we vote differently.
There were hundreds of people there who had said that they had never attended a town meeting before. Yeah. The matter was so important to them for whatever reason that, they took their own time to come out.
I have the fortune about living in town in the sense that I don't have to pick winners, or I have to worry about what I think about an article to say, oh, I want it to go this way. I just get to be a spectator and watch it happen, watch democracy happen in action. It's a special thing in Lancaster in particular, but in Massachusetts in general, that people are afforded this access to the governing process. I feel privileged to be party to it, because when I was in New Jersey, I think all of us just didn't worry about anything and just thought, people are taking care of this. I don't need to worry about it. And I think that's the exact wrong thing to think about government, that you need to be participant in it and not just wait for it to happen to you.
Yeah.
Is there anything in particular about this upcoming annual town meeting that is going to be an issue? It's going to draw attention, like the one you mentioned that was a special town meeting?
I mean, at the risk of overstating the obvious, I would say the budget, because while town meeting is voting on the budget, and it will be made clear that it's contingent on, a positive outcome of the question on the ballot, it is a bone of contention, rightfully so.
I just want to jump in here for a second. Because I think you rightly said, without overstating the obvious, and I think there's some concern that perhaps it's not the obvious to people because they might not even know about it. And that's why the Mothertown podcast is coming here, to kind of perhaps attract listeners and to hear, maybe for the first time, what's coming down the road at this town meeting and preparing them. So they might not even be aware that this is going to be voted on, or not even understand the conditions in which we've gotten here. Mm-hmm. And so going back to those things, what's a levy? What's an override? Why is our bond rating important? We don't have to start at the override question, because I think many people have questions about more basic things. Kate, what is a levy?
So the levy is the amount that a community is allowed to tax, and depending on where you are within that. So if you think of the levy as a thermometer, some communities don't tax all the way up to the top of the thermometer. And so wherever you are allowed by Massachusetts general law to tax up to 2.5% over what you had the previous year. That doesn't mean that all communities vote 2.5% above. Some only do 1, some do 1.5, 2. So that's called levy capacity. The levy ceiling is the highest amount that you can get to. And so Lancaster has been taxing at the levy ceiling for at least the past 5 years, with the inability to generate the amount of tax dollars to be able to sustain the operation. So for example, it would be as simple as you make $1,000 a month, but your expenses are $1,500 a month. And so to make up the $500 delta, you have to dip into your savings.
The delta being the difference.
The difference.
The $500 difference.
And so the idea is that the town has been using cash reserves or free cash, which is essentially the town's savings account, to make sure that we can meet our financial obligations. And unfortunately, we are at a point where we have depleted our savings accounts so much that it is now going to start hurting our bond rating, which you can also call a credit rating. So if you, Joe, are going to buy a home and you give the mortgage company your bank statements and it shows that you're spending $1,500, but your income is only $1,000 and you've depleted your savings, it's likely that if they grant you the ability to have a mortgage, it's going to be at a very, very high rate, such that it would be possibly economically not feasible for you to do whatever it is that you want to do, move into the home. That's what we're facing if we continue on this path.
So I'm Joe's citizen, and I wake up every day and go to work, and I pay my taxes, which I already think are too much. Mm-hmm. And I hear all this, and I'm angry. Like, what's gone wrong here? Mm-hmm. Something has to have gone wrong. Somebody had to mess up. Or is this just a case of rapidly increasing fixed costs that the town really has no control over? Fuel, school costs, insurance.
Yeah, it's the latter. And the big one, at least in Lancaster, is that we are a huge community with almost only residential. And of that residential, a lot of that is exempt, non-taxable.
What does that mean, is exempt? Why would something be exempt?
So if it is religious or educational or any other type of open space or town-owned land, that isn't taxed. That goes back to the dawn of time here in the Commonwealth. And so we have a large amount of properties that fit into the category that we can't tax. The Perkins School is a good example of that. The campus of Atlantic Union, lots of the church properties that are here. And the church owns a lot of properties. And so we have a relatively small amount of taxable property that are resident property, not businesses. And that gives us X amount.
We don't have a good mixed tax base.
I would argue we have virtually no mixed tax base.
So a town like Clinton has more of a mixed tax base, businesses, industry.
Yes. I guess I would compare us to something more like Bolton and Stowe. And simply that's a little bit easier here because it's part of the Neshoba district. But effectively, they have a more diversified tax base, although not huge. The difference there is that they don't have as much exempt property as we do. So it's like we're taxing less than half of the community, and they're taxing 3/4 or more.
I think this decision people have to make is a decision about the future they want Lancaster to be. Mm. And I'm not quick to say that there's anything in the budget that's a problem. It's a decision. Mm-hmm. And, people want to pull things out of the budget and say, well, why is this and why is that? And I think that's a risky way to understand and value what a budget is trying to do. And so now we're in a place where we want to keep all the things we love. We have a terrific school district. We have a terrific police department, fire department. Our DPW basically does miraculous things with so few resources. The community center is now something that is very active. I heard some of the statistics at one of our staff meetings, and Kelly has done so much in so little time that I don't think you can say, I want to pick one of these things out and everything else is going to be okay in Lancaster. Mm-hmm. Because that's the only thing I like. I only want to use the community center.
Right. Yeah.
Or even worse, I don't need the community center. I don't need a library. And all I need are police, fire, and DPW, which is absolutely true. But you're happy to have your police department when things go wrong. But living in a community isn't only about protecting yourself from when things go wrong.
Right.
It's about living in a community that's vibrant, culturally, recreationally, and interesting, things going on.
Well, and let me stop you right there to quote the police chief, and I don't think he'd mind, when we go through what would be Plan B, as draconian as the cuts would be, his comment to all of us has been, I don't want to lose an officer any more than I want to lose the social worker, because losing the town social worker only increases our caseload. And so that's a very real choice. They're equally as important, but for very different reasons. The caseload for the social work staff over there is well over 500 clients in a month. It's staggering. And there are some things that we need to be able to provide our residents that we can't do if we don't have licensed professional staff to do it. So if you don't use the town social worker, maybe you don't, and hopefully you never need to for anything other than positive things. But for those that do need that, they have greater access to resources with that person here than they would without that person here.
Mm-hmm. There's always among people a belief, I think, that there's always room to make cuts in anyone's budget, whether it's your home budget or the government's budget, and that it's there. You just have to find it. Mm-hmm. Is it true that there might be places in here that if all things were equal, you would say that's elective? We can get rid of that. That's not that important.
There's very few. I think the first iteration that we went through, we were looking at an operational override over 1.7 million. We're down to 1.2. Almost all of that was from the town side.
So those were things that you said, I'd rather not have to live without that, but under the circumstances, we got to let that go.
We have 3 less full-time equivalent employees in town. We have a lot that we have stopped have not proposed that we wanted to propose. I want to be clear, the budget that's going to be at town meeting on the 3rd is a level service budget.
What does that mean?
So that means we're not adding any new services. We're not expanding hours. We're just maintaining the current level of service and the current operation that you have today. That resident A comes to the town hall or the Prescott building and the hours are open from A to B. They will be open from A to B, not A to C. The town goes to the library and they're able to do the programs. You're not expanding programs exponentially. You're maintaining what you currently have. So this isn't doing more. This is maintaining what we have and increasing our revenues, which right now are only coming from residential taxes for the most part, in order to sustain the operation, period. And when we get to a time, and I'm saying when, not if, we get to a time where there is a more diversified commercial tax base, then we are seriously wanting to propose an underride, which means that we are basically asking to tax less than what people have. And I know folks say, well, if you get it, you're never going to give it back. The select board and my office have been consistent, as has the finance committee, that an underride, once we have a more stable tax base, is coming. Dick Trussell at Candidates Night talked about this as a loan, and Dick Trussell is one of the longest standing members of the finance committee. For those that don't know him, I encourage you to reach out because he's just brilliant. And his thought that this is more of a loan is an interesting way to think about it, and one that I think has a much less negative spin than those of us like myself who sort of deal in the more analytics.
Does it worry you? Is there jeopardy in thinking that way? If something down the road you don't expect comes up and you have to change your calculus, and now that underride is not as readily accessible as you hoped?
Yeah, I mean, of course it does, but it worries me more to have done what I think is so much progress in a culture shift, in a shift in the amount of information that we have out there and the quality of the staff and programming, and to lose that after only a year. That worries me more.
This is all excellent. We're coming to the end, but there's still a couple of things that I'm thinking about that maybe you might have some insight in. I heard you reference something about the budget as its level services, and if something, if the level services passes, there's not going to be more programs at the library. There's going to be just as many programs at the library. And I think that's a really great example, because what I think residents don't know is that they're not paying for any of the programs at the library. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, I can't think of a case where it's not true. John, the IT director, is always getting grants. The fire department's always getting grants. The police department's always getting grants. The library, probably 15% of its budget does not come from the appropriation. Mm-hmm. People in the departments understand that they need to, as part of their job, help the town find value where it can. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if folks appreciate how much that's going on. I don't know if I've gone to a staff meeting where someone wasn't talking about a grant that they're working on. And those are meaningful grants. Those aren't grants just to get money. Those are grants that are going to make operations in the town better.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That doesn't tell the whole story for many of the departments that if you pass this budget, everything's fixed. No, they still have to go back to work and find that money.
Absolutely.
On a level services budget to make ends meet.
More than 10% of our budget is reliance on grants and state aid, of which if the staff isn't there, we would not be eligible.
Yeah, that's something I've spoken to the trustees about is that, just like a bond rating, when a community's ability to provide services decreases, then grantors are less likely to want to give you money.
Absolutely.
They want to know they're giving their money to a winner that's going to make them look great and provide great services locally.
The grants for planning and for administrative services require our audited financial statement for a reason.
Heavy stuff, Kate. And I hope it's apparent to people listening to this podcast that this is a decision for you to make. And we're not suggesting that your decision isn't the right one for you with regards to the override. But decisions also have consequences. And even if taxes stay the same, tell me about that bond rating. That really is concerning to me.
Yes. Right now we have a AAA3 bond rating, which is adequate, but not great.
What's the interest rate right now on a municipal bond?
Well, it depends on the program, but if we're going to take the proposed new high school building as an example, Lancaster is looking at about $40 million that we would be responsible for. So with our current bond rating at a 30-year loan, we're at a little less than 6%, which is not great, but it's doable. If we were to not pass the override and deplete our reserves or not be able to present a balanced budget for whatever reason, the interest rate grows substantially. It'd be closer to 9%. And the difference in what is going to be paid as far as interest and principal would be almost double.
It's fair to say then that whatever it is at the time of the override, if people decide it's not in their best interest to pass the override, the cost of the school necessarily goes up.
Substantially.
As part of that decision, however the vote goes, the day after that vote is finished, there's more money on the books that has to be accounted for in the future that needs to find revenue.
That will take us more money to pay back.
Now, about this override, if I show up at town meeting and I put my vote out there, is that all I have to do? Do I go home and just wait to hear what happened?
Good question.
We've been doing this for 15 minutes, and it's only up till now that I've asked a good question, Kate?
No, they were all good questions, but this is a really good one.
I hope I'm keeping you awake.
So the budget process is two-step this year. People have to go to town meeting, and they have to vote to approve the budget. And then they have to go to their annual town election, which is on Monday the 8th. Polls open at 7 a.m. and they close at 8 p.m. The polling location is the old town hall, which is in the same campus as the Prescott and Community Center and Library. And they need to vote yes on question 1. Question 1 is located in the ballot the way on the right-hand side in the bottom corner. There'll be literature there that tells you what a yes vote means, what a no vote means. So that's how you pass the budget this year. Two-step. A yes at town meeting and a yes on question 1 on May 8th.
So to that end, this Thursday, I'm hoping to drop an email with the link to this, but also to a link on the library's webpage of the manual we all worked on in a bite-size package.
Yep.
People can look at what they want to look at instead of having to wade through an impressive document as it is. In that email Thursday will also be the yes and no documentation. So if all goes well, anybody who hasn't known anything about this is going to have a lot of information to make decisions upon in a very relatively short time span, because next week is the first vote that you have to place if you're interested in voting on the override. And is that a simple majority or is it?
Yes.
Kate, we're coming to the end, and I have to ask you about the future. I know you to be an optimist. All through this process, there's a lot of worrisome things that are being talked about, but I've only seen you with an attitude of hope, even in the midst of tremendous uncertainty. But optimism is something I think about over longer time spans. And so in the next 5 years or so, do you have an optimistic look out there for Lancaster? Are you optimistic about our future in the next 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely. I have to be because I don't know any other way. You know, in a perfect world, the projects that were proposed for North Lancaster are complete in the next 5 years, that we are receiving that revenue, that we are able to pay our expenses without raising taxes. As a matter of fact, pay our expenses with lowering people's bottom line taxes, that we're able to increase our credit rating far better than our current AAA3, and that we're able to keep those that are senior citizens and those on fixed incomes in their homes to age in place with robust social services, good emergency services, and an abatement program.
I heard talk that there might also be a local tax program, scaling tax.
Yep. So it's called a senior means tested, and it's just as it sounds. I'm bringing my knowledge from another community that I worked on when we did this. But essentially, it has parameters that are in place for age, income, value of your home, number of years that you've lived in the community. And the idea would be to have a separate reserve account where people can apply. And if they meet the parameters of the program, they can receive an abatement. It's not a work-off, and it's not a conventional abatement. It's literally cash money towards paying down what you owe in taxes. It's a very real program, and it's really taken off closer that you get to the city and some of the communities that have really large housing prices. But I think this town meeting has the first step, which is a tax fairness committee, the creation of that.
Oh, that's excellent. That's great news for people who perhaps are at a certain place in their lives and income is more or less fixed, that the town is interested in giving them relief and keep them in the town they love.
Absolutely.
Before I let you go, Kate, I am shamelessly using a question from another podcast that listeners here might be familiar with. What are you reading or watching, listening to right now that puts a smile on your face?
So I am reading City of Ember with my son.
Oh, that's terrific.
Is in the 4th grade. We alternate that he reads a chapter and I read a chapter, although he tries to get me to read 2 and he reads 1. And most of the time I relent. And so as far as watching, my husband and I are plowing through the last season 6 of Peaky Blinders, which is our guilty pleasure.
Kate, thanks for carving out some time out of your busy schedule to check in with the Mothertown podcast. I know we have to end soon because you've called a last-minute department heads meeting.
Sure did.
And I'm going to go there with bushy-tailed and wide-eyed. This is the inaugural episode of the Mothertown podcast. Episodes will drop intermittently before we can get our heads around doing it regularly. Enjoy the rest of your day and find a neighbor right now to say hello to.